I'm especially excited to share this video because a few weeks ago, I had the privilege of presenting this talk on menopause and digestion to the women in Karen Martell's midlife coaching program. And to be honest, it was a bit of a pinch me moment because I've been listening to Karen's Hormone Solution podcast for about 6 years, and I've learned so much from her and have tremendous respect for the work that she does. She's built an incredible community and consistently brings some of the brightest minds in women's health and hormones onto her show. So when she invited me to teach this topic to her members, I was incredibly honored. Digestive symptoms are one of the most overlooked parts of perimenopause and menopause. Bloating, reflux, constipation, changes in the microbiome, food sensitivities, and gallbladder issues. So many things that women are told these problems are just about aging or completely unrelated to their hormones, and they're not. In this presentation, I walk you through the many ways that estrogen influences the digestive system and why understanding these connections can help you finally make sense of what's happening in your body. I hope you enjoy it.
Let's get going. I'm going to do a little intro here, you guys. This is Cindy, which I'm just so excited, Cindy and I, that we finally get to see each other meet face to face.
Yes.
Because we've had interaction online before through email, and you're an affiliate for my products. I've been following you for a long time, so I'm so happy that we're getting you to do this masterclass.
Thank you, Karen. It's so fun. And I'm so excited to be here.
Yay! We have such a great group of women.
I can imagine.
Yes, I attract amazing women into this group. So they're here, and the ones that couldn't make it will be listening to the replay. So there will be a replay, ladies. But yeah, let's get started. I'm going to turn my mic off. I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. And as Karen said, please feel free to write your questions in the chat. And even if I happen to cover them as I go through, that's great, but then they're there for the end. So you guys already know this, right? If you've been with Karen, you've been in this group. Estrogen is not just a reproductive hormone. It affects every single cell and tissue in our body, and that includes the digestive system. And I don't think it's a whole lot of time spent on the digestive system, and everyone's different, and someone will be affected there more than others, just like, our journeys through perimenopause and menopause, we are affected differently. And again, a lot of it is our genetic makeup. Not all of it, but a lot of it can kind of point into that direction here. So what happens in the gut as we go through menopause doesn't stay in the gut, right? It's wide reaching. There's tentacles all over our bodies that can be regulated by what happens in the gut. So when it's not working right, we can feel pretty crappy, and we may not even associate it with what's going on in our digestive system. And unfortunately, and I'm sure most of us have experienced this at one point in our lives or another, if we go into the doctor's office and we tell them what's going on, they have a pill for this or a procedure for this, and that's just kind of slapping a band-aid on it. And usually there are repercussions from taking that pill or from that procedure. It's not innocuous. And unfortunately, when it comes to the gut, some of the medication can actually cause a whole ripple effect of nutrient deficiencies and just things not working right. That will, again, it'll slowly unravel things as we move through life, which is really unfortunate. And we don't even know what's happening. So one of the biggest things I hear from my clients or women in general, I can't eat the things I used to eat. And I see that big time as women are moving into perimenopause and menopause. And then I'll see them, taking those foods out. I'll see women doing a food intolerance test or allergy test. And that's not necessarily the first place that we need to go to, but I understand why we go to it. So I think if we can understand what is going on inside our digestive system, we can understand why all of a sudden we can't eat the things that we used to be able to eat. And what I see a lot of times is that we tend to take more and more foods out. And, if we go on a FODMAP diet or we do a food allergy test and we see this whole long list of foods that come back that we're allergic to, we take those out. All of a sudden, what we're eating is really, really narrowed, and we can become very nutrient deficient and not get the things that we need. And, there's a social aspect too, an enjoyment aspect to eating. So we lose that. And again, if we go to a doctor and let's say we have heartburn, which is often common as we're moving into the pause years, they'll give us a proton inhibitor or something to stop the acid reflux. That is a stopgap, okay? But there can be different things, take out certain foods. And even though I just kind of pushed against that, there are, I would say, maybe 4 basic foods that if someone's having a difficult time digesting, maybe take these out for a little bit and put one back in and then the other and just see how your body responds to it. But gluten's a big one, and gluten can have an issue with the esophageal sphincter, so more of the acid reflux and more irritation that's going on. And then dairy can be an issue for a lot of people. And then eggs can be as well, and soy. So those are kind of the 4 big ones that would be irritants that, yes, I would say, okay, maybe take them out, but make sure that you're not really narrowing dietary intake down to a very small array or variety of foods. And again, as you go into the doctors, they give you the proton inhibitor, and I'm going to go into what each part of the digestive system does, and you will understand why that can be detrimental to your health and you not getting the nutrients that you need. And all of these things can be influenced by our hormones, in particular, the loss of our estrogen. So here are some of the signs of a compromised digestive system. The next slide is actually going to show you some of the secondary signs that you might not necessarily associate with a compromised digestive system or tract. These are kind of obvious that you go, oh yeah, something's going on here. Heartburn, acid reflux, a stomach distension, bloating after you eat, upper abdominal pain, stinky farts and poops, indigestion, belching, gastritis, ulcers, constipation, diarrhea, which is put under a bucket of IBS, nausea, halitosis, undigested food in the stools, food sensitivities, and then colitis and Crohn's obviously is a problem in the digestive system. And those are more on the lines of an autoimmune response. And then secondary things that we might not associate with what's going on in the digestion would be eczema. And I know somebody had a question about that. So let me just pause here for a second. Why would eczema be associated with the digestive system? Well, there can be a couple different reasons. One is there's a lot of inflammation in the digestive system. Something called CYP can go up, and that can kind of just cause this histamine inflammatory response, and specifically eczema. I see dairy and gluten be an underlying cause of driving eczema. I can also see dysbiosis. So if we don't have the proper microbiome, if we have an overgrowth of yeast, if someone's taken a lot of antibiotics or maybe steroids because they've had allergies or other reasons for taking antibiotics, that can create an environment that we will actually see eczema come out of that. And estrogen does affect our microbiome. It does affect the inflammatory response in our digestive system. So as we start to lose that, we can see more skin issues as we move into perimenopause and menopause. Another thing we can see is fatigue. And again, we may not be able to digest and absorb the foods that we're eating, the nutrients that we're eating. Low levels of B vitamins and minerals often happen. And as I go through the specific functions of each part of the digestive system, you'll understand this a little bit more. And that's in the next slide or 2. Yeast infection can be a result of a compromised digestive system, and especially be associated with use of antibiotics. And urinary tract infections can be driven by yeast, as a matter of fact. So that all is kind of related. Depression, anxiety. So again, our moods are all predicated on the nutrients that we get, on serotonin. Elevated C-reactive protein. So if I see somebody with a marker on their blood, C-reactive protein, that is elevated, doesn't tell us where that inflammation is coming from, but it tells us that there is some. And I always look at the digestive tract as well as oral health. We can see hormonal imbalances, and I would say we would see more of that in the woman who is still in her fertile years. less so in perimenopause and menopause. But we can still see that migraines can be initiated by what's happening in our gut, thyroid issues, again, because of that's our minerals and possibly in amount of inflammation that we're experiencing, ADD, OCD, fibromyalgia, brain fog, autoimmune disease. So these are all kind of the secondary things that people can exhibit and not be exhibiting any overt digestive issues. Okay, so it's interesting how there is that overlap. And doctors definitely don't connect the dots there at all. And I might want to back this up just a little bit to kind of give you an idea of how I got so focused on the digestive system. And Karen, in my introduction, did say that my digestive system was rebelling like a teenager, and it was. I was in it was a very stressful time, and my digestive system has always been kind of my canary in the coal mine of how well I'm doing. And I was going through divorce at the time, and everything shut down. And my stomach shut down. I think I ended up with SIBO, which they didn't even have a word for that back then. And so I got really involved in figuring out how the digestive system works and how our nervous system works with that. I didn't know anything about hormones at that point in time. In fact, I didn't really start knowing about hormones until about 6 years ago, even though I went into perimenopause when I was 43. I was menstruating 1 month, and then the next month I wasn't. So that's what stress can do and losing weight can do, too much weight. And I had multiple different things happening throughout my digestive system, which all came together and just kind of made it freeze. So we're going to go through. I think it's interesting to understand where the digestion actually starts. So it actually starts in our mouth and then goes through the esophagus. And there's wonderful little sphincters all throughout the digestive system. So there's a sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach. There's a sphincter between the stomach and the small intestine, and then from the small intestine to the large intestine. So we have those sphincters so that things don't back up. And oftentimes when we have acid reflux or GERD, things are being backed up, pushed up through the esophagus for one reason or another. It could be the esophageal sphincter has relaxed. Could be because of hormones. It could be that maybe the bloating that you're feeling in the abdominal area is pushing up against the diaphragm, up against the stomach, pushing up against the esophagus. It could be that, we're putting on a lot of weight, and that weight can push things up. Again, against that, gluten can also relax the esophageal sphincter as well. So there's a lot of different reasons why that can be happening. In addition to, this whole wonderful long tube, we have 3 different organs that facilitate, help, and are integral parts of digestion. So we have the pancreas right here, and that little guy produces our digestive enzymes, which are really important. And yes, estrogen affects our ability to produce the pancreatic enzymes. So for some women, as they're losing their estrogen, we can have less enzymes being produced. And part of that too is change in the microbiome. And then we have the liver, and the liver is, a wonderful organ. It does so much for us. And one of the things that happens in the liver is that bile is produced. The bile is responsible for packaging up our toxins and our hormone metabolites and the waste products. And then it takes that bile and then it dumps it into the gallbladder. And it's stored here until we eat. And when we eat, there is bile that is dripped into the top of our large intestine. And I'm going to talk in just a minute when we get to the small intestine, so you know what's happening there and how the bile plays a role and how estrogen plays a role in making that bile. Okay, so we're first going to talk a little bit about the mouth, and that's where estrogen influences the production of saliva. And we have enzymes in our saliva. Mainly those enzymes work on our carbohydrates as amylase. Estrogen influences our taste and our smell influences our taste. It's huge with oral microbiome, and so the health of our mouth, the health of our gums, our teeth is heavily influenced by estrogen. And again, some people have really, really good mouth health going into menopause. And some women, that is going to be their weak spot. And we have to know that. Okay. And then vagal tonality is really important. And our vagus nerve, and I know Karen has done a lot on this on some of her podcasts, is really important in the rest and digest portion of our digestion, and it has an influence on what's happening in our mouth as well. So that estrogen, I mean, you just look at all these things right here, and this is just our mouth. This is just the beginning of our digestion. I fortunately do not have any issues with my mouth. I'm very lucky. I have issues throughout the rest of my digestive system, but that's not one of them. So be grateful for that. And you know, periodontal disease has been associated because it can be so inflammatory, has been associated with cardiovascular disease, with Alzheimer's, and with overall systemic inflammation, which I did mention when, you know, we look at CRP on a lab test. This is one of the areas, if it's elevated, that I do wonder what's happening. Then we go to the stomach, and lots going on in the stomach. And the big player here is our hydrochloric acid. And as estrogen goes down, our hydrochloric acid, the production of that can go down, and partially because it's affecting the parietal cells. So, you know, when we think about some of the basics of what estrogen does, estrogen is important for our tissue, right? For the collagen, for our ligaments, all of that. And here again, if you think about the esophageal sphincter and all the sphincters throughout our digestive system, estrogen affects the integrity of that tissue. And same thing, the tissue that aligns our whole digestive system, including in the stomach, can be altered with the loss of the estrogen. And we need to know the role of what's happening in each part of the digestive system. And again, I said the HCl is kind of the main player here, the main character. And what HCl does is it sterilizes our food, which we have to have, or we be eating stuff and we be getting a lot sicker because different microbes come in on our foods, on our hands, all those things. So we need that. It's really important. And if you think about it, if that goes down, you're going to be more susceptible to getting some bad bacteria in your system, and you do not want that. And then it's responsible also for breaking down your protein into amino acids. That's super important. If that's not happening, it just kind of sits there and you feel like you have a brick in your stomach, and it slows down the whole motility, and we can have some nice putrefaction happening, and that's when our farts get a little smelly and it's a little embarrassing. So we want that working. And then kind of another side issue that, you know, people don't think about and doctors definitely don't think about is that hydrochloric acid is responsible for cleaving our B vitamins and our minerals, including iron, from the foods that we eat and even from our supplements. So if you are having an issue with that sphincter and things are coming back up into the esophagus, which we don't want, and you are starting to take on a regular basis a proton inhibitor or acid reflux medication, we could ultimately start having a problem. Again, we could have a nutrient deficiency. Maybe you're not getting enough protein, maybe you're not getting enough B vitamins or minerals. So this is really important to have that understanding. All right, then we go to the small and large intestines. And there's a lot that's going on in the small intestines. This is where we're going to be having, you know, further digestion. And again, that's from the enzymes that are created or made in the pancreas and go into the small intestine. It's also the bile that's coming from the liver via the gallbladder. So those are all helping with the digestion, and this is where the absorption of our nutrients is happening. That's all in the small intestine. And, you know, here again, estrogen is responsible for our tissue integrity. So the lining of our small intestine is just one cell layer thick. And if that estrogen goes away and we already have some inflammation going on, you know, it's just gets a little crankier. And the estrogen also helps with the tight junctions that are happening in between the cells of the small intestine. If those junctions start to separate a little bit because of inflammation and or the lack of estrogen, all of a sudden little tiny, tiny microscopic particles of food can be leaking out. And how does your body respond to that? It's like, that's a foreign invader. So all of a sudden we have these food allergies. All right. So we have to repair the leaky gut. We have to find out where it's coming from, why it's happening, and then remove anything that maybe is causing more inflammation and then heal that. And lots of times those food allergies will go away. I used to have a lot of sensitivities. I can still have sensitivities, but I've been doing this so long on myself. I kind of know how to work it and where to work it. So this is where we can have that leaky gut and increase in the food allergies. And I'm assuming that most of you have heard about SIBO, but I'm going to mention it here because that can be a big source of inflammation in the small intestine. So SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So most of our bacteria is supposed to be in our large intestine. That's where all that does the churning and fiber feeds it. It's supposed to feed it in the large intestine. And everything kind of gets churned up. The water gets absorbed in the large intestine, and then we're just left with that waste that we just want to dump out. So if that bacteria somehow gets moved up, let's say the sphincter got loose a little bit, or there's been chronic constipation and things kind of get backed up, maybe into the small intestine. When we start having bacteria in the small intestine and we feed it with the food that we have, that's when we get this hydrogen gas and this methane gas, which makes you really bloated and uncomfortable. It affects your motility, either speeds it up or slows it down to like nothing. Very inflammatory, very uncomfortable. It does interfere with our absorption, digestion. It's really uncomfortable. So we can also get SIBO, and I've seen this in many women, and myself included, where I kind of had a bug, an intestinal bug, and then all of a sudden everything was off from there, and I had to figure it out. So that can be a trigger as well. So that's what's happening in the small intestine. The large intestine, again, is where we eliminate the waste, we absorb our water there. We have a ton of DNA in our microbiome, which is not only in our gut, but we have microbiome on our skin, in our mouth. We have it everywhere. And the DNA in that gut bacteria just dwarfs the DNA that we bring into it. So it kind of runs us, and we have to respect that. And we have to get that microbiome on our skin, inside of our digestive system, working well again. So I want to circle back to the liver, and I mentioned bile. So I call bile the liquid gold because it does so much. And if we don't have adequate amount of bile, our digestive system just slows down and we can't break down our fat. Even though we're getting some lipase from our pancreas, we really can't break down and absorb our fat. And we also cannot break down and absorb our fat soluble vitamins. So that's super duper important. And how does estrogen play in this role? So there's something called choline. And choline is the backbone of making bile. Choline is also the backbone of making something called acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter. And that neurotransmitter and the acetylcholine obviously affects our brain and the function of our brain. It also has an effect on our vagus nerve. So it will stimulate that. So that helps to cause relaxation and helps move us more into that parasympathetic, that more relax and digest phase instead of the sympathetic, which is that fight or flight. So choline is really important for our brain, the vagus nerve function and stimulation, and then what's happening in the motility and the digestion of our fats. It was really important. Now, the thing is that estrogen plays an integral role in making choline and then attaching it to phosphatidylcholine, and I think even with acetylcholine. So listen up. Some people have a genetic SNP where when they lose their estrogen. Well, even before they lose their estrogen, they have a difficult time making choline and having this whole pathway work properly. When they lose their estrogen, so they might kind of limp along, in their fertile years, they might have issues with if they eat a fatty meal, they may have to rush to the bathroom. That's one of the signs that there's an issue with bile. For some people that don't have enough bile, so they don't have the motility, all right, it can go either way. So if you've had issues with constipation, it could be a variety of reasons, but it could be this. It could be that you have this gene. It's called the PEMT gene, where you have a difficult time making choline. Now, one of the things I do with my clients is I take an intake, and that's part of it. And I always ask, has anyone had their gallbladder removed in your family? Do you, anyone in your family, do you know if they have issues with either constipation or having to run to the bathroom after they had a fattier meal? Are there issues with really dry skin or dandruff? Because you think about it, you need your fat soluble vitamins and enough fat to keep your skin really nice. All right. So these would be all indications that maybe there's an issue with that choline. So I found out kind of in a roundabout way that I have the PEMT gene and I'm homozygous. So I have two of those genes. And it wasn't until probably about 7 or 8 years into menopause that all of a sudden I was having some issues, skin issues more than anything. Not so much the constipation at that point, although I was still dealing with that on a much smaller scale. What was happening for me was that I was getting cracks around my nail beds to the point where putting my hands in water really bothered me. So guess what? I had to take myself off of dish duty, which I was so disappointed about for a while. And then the other thing was that my heels were cracking and bleeding, and it was painful. And I live by the ocean. And so, sometimes when you shave your legs and you go right into the ocean, you can have that little stingy, salty from the salt water feeling. Well, I made a point not to shave my legs when I would go in the ocean because it really became very painful. It was still painful. And I thought, gosh, what is going on here? And so some of these can be signs of thyroid issues. And so I had my thyroid check and I went, no, nothing going on here. And I happened to run across Ben Lynch, who is a genetic genius, and he wrote the book Dirty Genes. I ran across something, a poster, something that he had done, and he was talking about the PEMT gene and bile and choline and all of that. And I had had my genetics done a while back. It was complicated. And so I only took little pieces, like what was my MTHFR gene, what was my COMT gene, a couple other things, but hadn't looked at PEMT. So anyway, I looked at it, so I was homozygous. Now, to let you know how common it is, about 20% of the population, not just women, but the population are homozygous. They have the two genes for the PEMT gene. About 50 are heterozygous. So there's about 70 of us that are running around with this gene that as we move into the pause years, can start to wreak havoc on us. I would be kind of curious how many of you have had gallbladder issues or your gallbladder removed as you moved into perimenopause and menopause, because that is usually the time it is removed. And what's happening is you're not making enough choline and it's getting stuck. It's being too viscous. So during perimenopause, and also sometimes if you've had 3 or 4 children and after that fourth one or so, you can have gallbladder issues. And part of the problem is, or the result of it is that baby needs a lot of choline, right? It's helping form that brain. And if a woman has that gene, possibly by her fourth pregnancy, she just may have dried up her choline. Baby gets it before we get it. So that's when we see that gallbladder removal. All right. Someone said they've had their removed. Yes, we can do without the gallbladder, but what happens is that the bile is just continually being dripped into the small intestine. Some people are okay with that and some people are not. So we want to keep as many organs as we possibly can. The large intestine is full of estrogen receptor sites, so that will help with motility. And that is one of the things that can go down as we go into perimenopause. And I don't know if people are aware of this, but there have been studies that show that women on HRT, estrogen replacement, do have a lower occurrence of colon cancer. So, it's very protective. So, how can we increase choline status? I always like to do things kind of from the bottom up. So, to me, the bottom, which means the base where you start first, would be to eat foods that contain choline. And probably the biggest ones here would be egg yolks, organ meats. Of course, all of you love organ meats. And then red meat. And if you're a vegan, it's going to be really tough to get choline from your diet. It just is. You're going to be having to supplement. And then use HRT to increase your estrogen levels, to increase the production of choline, your own body's ability to do that. And then supplement with choline and even taurine and some other, bitter herbs, things like that, which helps to flow the choline in the bile through the bile ducts and through the gallbladder. It's interesting, but in the old days, people used to have aperitifs, right, before they ate, and they often put bitters in their aperitifs. And that would actually stimulate the production of bile and start to stimulate their digestive juices, which is we should do that. Even having a fresh lemonade with maybe sweetened with stevia or monk fruit, something like that. And having the lemon rind, that's bitter. And with ginger, that's a bitter food. Coffee is a bitter food. Who doesn't like coffee, right? So that will stimulate the production of bile as well. So just real quickly, some of the signs of low choline status would be the dry skin, the cracked heels, the slow gut motility, constipation, reoccurring SIBO. This can be an underlying cause or underlying driver. Greenish or lighter or yellowish stools means that the bile is not getting down into the digestive system. All right. It should color your stools. If your stools are really light, especially on a consistent basis, you probably have an issue with that. If you have a difficult time digesting your fats, low fat vitamin status, I already mentioned the dandruff, and that brain fog, okay, that's acetylcholine. And I think that's it that I want to say on that. So, what to do if your digestive system is rebelling? And I know you guys, you've been with Karen, you're in this group, you know already that HRT is just the icing on the cake. We can't just do HRT and not do anything else. So you have to regulate and modulate and manage stress. Easier said than done. And sometimes, it's the stress is being triggered by inflammation in the body. So physiological stress that maybe you're not even aware of. Maybe it's something, it's trauma that hasn't been dealt with. That all feeds into that stress part of it. And that vagus nerve is super important when we talk about your body's ability to rest and digest. Very, very important. And I'm turning into that more and more, even myself, just watching my heart rate variability, my vagus nerve, my digestive system, my stress, all of that. It's just so interrelated, and some for more people than others. Your sleep obviously is super important when it comes to everything that happens in your body. Your diet, your nutrition, I've already talked about that. What things are the most inflammatory, maybe take those out. But we don't want to narrow things down too much for too long of a time. And I don't know if I mentioned FODMAP. FODMAP is a diet that a lot of people will do if they're having a lot of bloating or they have SIBO, and it will give you relief. I'm not opposed to that, but it's not something you want to be on for more than 3, 4, 6 months max. And it's not going to kill the SIBO. It's just going to be more symptomatic relief than anything. You still have to work on, getting out that SIBO. Thyroid status, I mean, thyroid plays a big role on your motility and the energy of your cells, right? And that includes the digestive system. So your thyroid has to be making sure that that is working adequately and optimally. Herbs and supplements. So I didn't mention some, I'll mention, I have a whole list in another slide, but herbs and supplements can definitely be really helpful in supporting your digestive system. I know somebody's sent in a question, do we need to take digestive enzymes? Some people will need to take that, some people will not. And there'll be different times in your life where you'll need to take it. And maybe sometimes where it doesn't need to be in your stack. It kind of depends on so many different things, right? And the more in tune we become to our bodies, the ins and out, to our hormones, all of that, we get to be pretty good at kind of knowing when we need a little extra support and when we don't. Okay, good labs. We always have to know what's going on as far as inflammation, as far as thyroid, vitamin D, our iron status. These are all indications of what's going on inside of our digestive system and will often help our digestive system work a little bit better. So, those foundations really do matter. I do want to mention something that it's not up here, but I think it's important to mention. I know for many people, medication is a part of their lives, and if they're not on HRT, probably more so. And some of the things that we don't think about that really throw our digestive system off is long-term use or even short-term use of birth control pills. Birth control pills can change the microbiome and our flora, and some people are going to be more sensitive than others. It can really chew up our B6 vitamins. So that can start altering that digestive system long before we get into perimenopause. And for some women, taking oral progesterone can be an issue. It is for me. And it's an issue because, and I've tried it a couple different times, it's like, is this in my head or is it really happening? And when you have a chronic digestive system and issues with it, it's kind of like, well, is it A? Is it B? Is it what did I do here? You don't quite know. So I've tried it many different times. So for some people, that can be an issue. And then I've already mentioned the acid reflux medications can be an issue as well. So, and steroids can be an issue, oral and even inhaled steroids. So just kind of putting that all into perspective, and then how we eat. And I think this was a question that came in, so this might be a good time to answer it, is does fasting help with digestion? It's not necessarily something that I throw out there unless somebody's got SIBO and really a stubborn case of SIBO. Then I would say we really need to let the digestive system relax and rest and not feed the little bugs in the small intestine. So my really hard cases, we'll put them on what I call an elemental diet, where it's actually pre-digested amino acids. So they're not necessarily totally fasting, but you can do a fast. And many times, minimum would be 3 days. And when you're on an elemental diet, you can go a little bit longer, maybe 5 and 7 days. And sometimes I do have my clients, again, if they're still struggling, maybe do an elemental shake once or twice a day, and then maybe a small meal. Just allow things to kind of clear out and relax. Having said that, anyone with SIBO or anyone that's kind of having issues, I say stop snacking, stop eating in between the meals, go at least 5 hours between one meal to the next. And that's for digestion, but that's also for blood sugar regulation too, okay? And getting our bodies better metabolically conditioned. So if we can get that snacking out, there can be a lot of different benefits on a lot of different levels. All right. So here are some other ideas more specific on how to support the digestive system, what our bodies may need, so replacing it with these things. So dietary fiber can be really helpful with motility and feeding the good microbiome. Now, having said that, if anyone has SIBO, I understand and I know firsthand that dietary fiber is going to be really hard for you to handle. So, in fact, I would probably take that out while you're dealing with the SIBO flare. But what happens with a SIBO patient, if they're taking out that dietary fiber for a long period of time, is we're not feeding the short chain fatty acids and the butyrate and things like that. And I would then put them on a specific type of probiotic to generate those things. So I'm kind of getting off into the weeds here, but you want your choline generators, and that would be actually taking choline, it would be taking taurine, it would be doing your bitters. And I will mention a specific supplement. I didn't ask Karen if I could, but I think I can. It is Dr. Ben Lynch, who I mentioned before, does have a supplement line. And when it comes to the bile support, I like his the best. There's others out there, and it's called bile nutrients. And I like his combination the best. It does have a little bit of HCl in it as well, along with taurine, choline, and some of the bitters and lactic acid that will help with that. And that's my favorite one. Digestive enzymes can also be very helpful, and supplementing with betaine HCl, that would be your stomach acid, can be a life-changing thing. And some of the distinction that I make between low stomach acid and maybe a SIBO type of scenario, although you can have both happening at the same time, is I'll ask my ladies, when you eat a meal, the pattern, do you bloat up right after you eat a meal, or is it delayed a little bit more? If you bloat up right after, it could be a stronger indication of low betaine HCl. If you're bloating up a little bit later, I would say more maybe digestive enzymes or the SIBO, and especially if the SIBO, if your belly's kind of flat in the morning, and then it just continues to grow and grow and grow throughout the day as you're feeding those little bacteria every time you eat, right? That's more of an indication of SIBO. So that's kind of making a distinction there. And then, eating or taking herbs that aid in digestion, which I've already mentioned, ginger, bitters, cayenne, coffee. And then eating foods that soothe would be lemon and essential oil, limones, and then of course our wonderful hormones, which can help with everything. And then actually repairing, a little bit different from supplementing what we've lost or what we need at the time, kind of two different things. So this can be helpful in healing the lining, which usually needs to happen if we have, SIBO, if we have an overgrowth of yeast, not enough enzymes, all of those things, we usually do need some repair here. So bone broth is just a natural thing to do. If you have high histamine, you might want to avoid that. But zinc carnosine is my favorite form of zinc when it comes to the betaine HCl, that stomach acid, because it helps to heal the parietal cells and that stomach lining, and so our bodies can make more of the HCl when that happens. That's something in my stack, and then when I say stack, that means it's something that I take all the time and probably always will, because that's just an area that I need support in. Vitamin C is wonderful with collagen, with mucosal lining. It's good in a lot of different ways. The peppermint oil can help with digestion all the way through, and some women find that a really easy one to do. Aloe vera is very soothing and healing. L-glutamine is very soothing and healing of the whole intestinal lining. Immunoglobulins can be really helpful, a little bit more powerful than the L-glutamine, essential fatty acids. Adrenal function, repairing that, okay, supporting the adrenals, because that SIG-A can cause more inflammation. And if we support the adrenals, that kind of goes back and forth with the immunoglobulin SIG-A. And then I did put this in, a BPC 157 oral peptide. It would be the first thing that I choose. I would choose maybe some of these unless I'm really dealing with someone that just needs so much help from the very beginning and is really suffering, then I would reach for the BPC 157, or they're just tired of things. And I find that really my clients only need it for 30 to 60 days max to use something like that. An overall really nice repair supplement, and I may have mentioned it, is Designs by Health, and it's called GI Revive. It's a really nice one that encompasses a lot of these things. All right. So overall, right, what to do if your digestive system is rebelling? It would be to work with an experienced practitioner, test, don't guess. And then I do like doing one of these two functional tests because we can guess forever. I mean, I'm pretty experienced and good at kind of figuring it out, but man, if I can get my ladies to do one of these, it just cuts through a lot of noise.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Cindy. That was
Thank
incredible.
you. Thank you. It was lovely to be here. So.
Yeah, I am always very interested in anything and all things gut. I mean, it plays a role in every disease I think that we have. So,
It definitely can have a role in that, yes. And, for those of us where that's our weak spot, we all have our area. It can be debilitating, just like thyroid, if it's not working right, it can be debilitating, or, whatever involves your sleep can be debilitating. So wherever it is to get the support that you need, yeah. And so I'm very sympathetic for people with gut issues. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I was just actually I was talking with my nephew this morning. He's 19 years old and his iron panel came back just horrible. I mean, he said he's so depleted. He's losing his hair. And I'm like, this is so odd for a male to see this,
Yeah.
especially a young male.
Yeah.
And I said, it's gonna be your digestion.
Yeah.
Guaranteed. Like he
Oh,
was
yeah.
born with constipation, and I don't think he's ever
Oh.
had like, so maybe it's SIBO or something, but I was like, we have to look at your digestion. You've got to like increase your HCl, your digestive enzymes, get to the root
I
of this.
I would really suggest the GI Effects by Genova Labs or the GI Maps
Yeah.
by Diagnostic Labs. At that
Right.
point, I would really like to see what's going on. And I mean, I always think about, when it's low in a young man, yeah, digestion, and also think about, is there any internal bleeding at all?
Yeah. Yeah, I know, which is terrible to think that that might be happening. But yeah,
Yeah,
he
it's real.
needs to get a stool test,
He does.
fit test. Yeah.
Even just the basic one that you would get from your doctor. I'm not talking about a functional medicine one, just to see if
Yeah.
there's occult blood. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Thanks, ladies. Thanks, everybody, for joining in today. And thank you so much, Cindy. It was great to
My
have
pleasure. Thank you. All righty. Talk to you
you. Bye,
later.
ladies.
Bye bye.